Hey, Henry. How are you?
I'm good. How are you?
Good. Well, thanks for coming back, joining again. I appreciate it.
Of
Um,
course. So let me share my screen then.
okay.
You can see this, right?
Yeah, there you are.
The main point is to show what bots are really and compare and contrast against agentic AI, which is a different technique that's
Yeah,
developing fast. And then Brandon, please feel free to kind of interrupt and ask questions that you think your audience might have as I go.
I definitely will. Thanks.
Awesome. So I think the first thing to frame here is kind of the disruption that's happening in the digital world. I see is as similar to I guess the industrial revolution, or kind of what you see in car manufacturing today, right? Where you have robots building cars, whereas before you had people building cars using tools. And so we see very similar transformation in the digital world. So we have lots of tools, right? Like EHRs or ATS systems, payroll systems, HRIS systems, you name it. They're all meant to be used and operated by a human. Okay. Just like, I don't know, a power drill or an assembly line or something like that was supposed to be used by a human in car manufacturing. And what we're seeing today is the rise of software agents. Okay, bots, agents kind of imply a little bit of an AI element, but essentially giving software agency to use these tools, not just be the tool to be used. I think that is the big disruption and transformation that's happening generally in the digital world. Does that concept make sense?
Yes, it does.
Okay, awesome. So sometimes, bots don't look like this, right? They don't, this is just like an AI image. Bots, they don't really have a shape or form. And so the easiest way is to just show it in action. And here we can also see some of the advantages that can come about. So on the left side, we see a human and they're using software as a tool. Doesn't really matter what we're doing. In this case, it's about patient responsibility, collecting the right amount, stuff like that. So things like
Mhm.
copays. There's lots of steps. It takes here about a minute and a half for someone who's pretty savvy and clicking through. The right-hand side is already done. I'll put it again, is a bot doing the exact same process and more in the background in a fraction of the time, right? So you can imagine if you're doing this repetitively, thousands of times, hundreds of thousands of times over years, right?
Mhm.
There's no way a human can be this fast, right? So if there's so many steps involved, it's repetitive, it's error prone. That's where a bot can really shine like this. Scale is another factor. So this is just another random example. This had to do with consent forms in human services for homeless people. And basically to be compliant, they had to transfer consent forms from one system to another, 100,000 ones. And so again, it's very high volume, it's repetitive. It's still error prone. It's not 50 steps here, but it's still, you could upload the wrong consent form, right? And things like that. And so these are good use cases for bots where scale is really not an issue, because bots, once you program the DNA of a process into a bot, the bot can simply clone itself on demand and divide and conquer the work with 100% consistency. And so that's
What
like another power. Yeah.
what does that mean? So conceptually, you program a
Mhm.
program to automate this whole process, like what we're looking at. What do you
Yes.
mean? What do you mean it clones itself or creates other
Yes.
bots or agents to do portions of the work? Like, what does that look like? How is that implemented?
Yeah. Thank you for the question. So let me try to explain. So the DNA of the bot is equivalent to the business logic behind the process.
Mhm.
So if we're doing pure RPA, it means it's rules based. There's also hybrid with AI involved, but let's not go there yet. If it's rules based, we define all the rules programmatically. So it's deterministic, it's explicitly programmed, so you can
Right.
reason about it, you know exactly what's going to happen. It's consistent and it's very fast, as we saw. But more than that, you can have multiple of these bots operating in parallel. So the best example I have, I think I may have mentioned it last time we met, was our Genesis story with 70,000 checks, insurance payments that needed to be posted
Mhm.
into a patient accounting system. Now, if you imagine, they were not all physical checks, but if you imagine 70,000 checks on your desk, okay, it would make a big pile. And then you're taking one off the top and you're saying, okay, how much was this? What is it paying for? Okay, let me enter it into the system. Then you take the other one. It would take forever, right? So what a bot solution can do is, well, I already got the business logic encoded in the DNA. So now it's just going to see what is my rate of consumption of this work queue compared to the size of the work queue. If that ratio is off, I'm going to fire off another bot with the same DNA, the same business logic
Mm.
to operate at the same time. So you divide it. So, now you got two bots pulling off the pile. Okay. So on and so forth until you have hundreds of clones, and then you can operate very quickly.
I
Now,
see.
these bots, like, where do they live? They live ephemerally in the cloud. And this may be a little abstract. So what that means is that there's no dedicated computer or server that's necessarily always running this bot.
Mm-hmm.
What it means is that the code for the bot exists, but it's spun up on demand. So when there's work to do, some server, probably in the Midwest somewhere, wakes up this bot and runs it. And after it's done, it will like die again. So it's ephemeral,
Mm-hmm.
but it can happen with hundreds of these clones in parallel. And that's how it can really get to scale like this.
Okay, so the key is they're running at the same time.
Yes.
That's the idea. Let's say there's 1,000 checks, and your controller bot determines that this could be split up into two piles of 500 checks. I'm going to spin
Yep.
off one other bot. It's going to do the exact same thing, but it's going
Yep.
to process piles of 500 checks at the same time. You have two bots doing the same work, basically.
That is exactly right. And that is the only way that I really know how you can get instant scalability with consistency. So human teams try to do this, right? They're like, oh, wait, we just got a big backlog to work through. Let me augment my staff with like
Right.
20 temp workers, right? But the problem there is, even if they have an SOP, even if you train them how to do this, they're not going to do it all the same way. And there's going to be human error involved. Right? Those problems go away with bots.
That makes sense. So do you have, is it called like a controller bot or something like that? So you have the main bot, the main program. There has to be one bot that controls everything, right? So like if it
Yeah.
decides
Yep.
like it's going to spin off another bot that looks essentially the same, it does
Yes.
that. And then that other bot, I guess at some point dies. It's not needed anymore. Is there like a controller bot that controls the
Yes.
entire workflow?
Yeah, you could say that. It's usually referred to as an orchestrator bot.
Okay.
And once we get to like AI agents, it gets even more specialized, where you have orchestrators, you have QA agents, you have managers, you have decision makers, you have execute, you have all these different things. It's really interesting how that is shaping up. But yes, to answer your question quickly, yes, there's an orchestrator kind of looking at how fast are we progressing through this work queue for the day.
Okay.
If
Okay.
that rate is okay, I don't need to do anything. If it's too slow compared to the size of the work queue,
Mhm.
fire off another bot and repeat, right? So if it's still not enough, get another clone
Right.
until we're good.
Got it.
Cool. Moving on, right? So integration. So in healthcare, which is where we do most of our work, you don't always have interoperability, right? It's kind of infamous for that. And so if you're trying to integrate different systems, whether different EHR systems, different instances of the same EHR, or an EHR system with a payroll system or ATS system or CRM system, et cetera, sometimes that creates what we call like swivel chair roles, right? Where like you're literally just entering data from one system to another and swivel sharing to the other system. So you kind of enter it. And it's necessary work because the data has to flow, but it feels like the kind of work that shouldn't have to get done, right? And in my opinion, shouldn't have to get done. It's like a result of just, this ecosystem of so many various different entities and different incentives and things like this. But bots are one way to solve for this. So whenever there's swivel sharing roles, actually, usually there's good reason to have a bot because most of those workflows are rules-based and high
Mhm.
volume. Other ones like, you can also use this for better resource allocation and intelligence in terms of making recommendations for example, matching up patients with caregivers or clinicians, et cetera. And the point here is also very often bots can be paired up with humans so that you can leverage human judgment but leverage bots for the necessary grunt work to lay up the decision, if that makes sense. So instead of having to pull all this data from somewhere or figure out, who we might be able to delegate this appointment to, or, someone canceled who can do this, we can tee everything up for human judgment, which is a more efficient use of human time. And so here's like an example of what it might look like, right? This is just one random bot solution, but there's generally like a workflow like this. We figure out what work do we have to do. We then work through it to actually process that work. And all the time we have reporters that essentially report back to the stakeholder, hey, this is what I did today. My workload was 700 checks, whatever. And 658 of them were posted, no problem. And then the rest of them, I think you may want to take a look at because something didn't match my assumptions, for example. So we call those like success logs and client review logs. There's always transparency in what the bot did or couldn't do. And really interestingly, that latter part, the client review log, has often resulted in secondary benefits because it surfaced data integrity issues or upstream process issues that an organization was not aware of prior. But now that they're aware of it, they can go and fix it at the root. So that's another benefit. We don't have to linger too much. It's just the idea that there's, many different workflows, many different portals. If there's a way for a human to do it, there's usually a way for a bot to do it, if you can define that process. Yeah, I think you guys get the gist now. So here, let me go back here. Like, where can you do this stuff, right? And this is by no means exhaustive. It's probably outdated at this point. But it should give you some ideas. So revenue cycle is a big area. So dealing with numbers, finance, that kind of administration, bots can be great. And HR administration, like hiring, like intake, like payroll, like compliance, like training, like things like that, credentialing, audits, compliance. Bots are great because what they have in common is that they're rules-based, right? So if you want to know, hey, am I following all of my pay requirements that I'm supposed to? Hey, am I following all of the labor law requirements that I'm supposed to? And with several clients that we worked with, they have all the intents in the world to do that, but it's really hard to do sometimes. And what most organizations do is that they just spot check when they have time, which is not the greatest way to manage risk. And so with bots, because volume is not a problem, you can actually audit in an unbiased and comprehensive way so that you understand your compliance posture and you can take action to improve it. The reporting and business intelligence, like we talked about the exceptions, like that's there. Workflow supervision, I forget if we talked about Sentinel last time, but that's that concept of helping people prioritize what they need to do and giving management visibility into where things are getting stuck. Integrating different systems, right? Synchronizing data, ensuring data integrity, and what we saw earlier about teeing things up for more optimal resource allocation and human decision making.
So I'm not sure if I asked you this last time, but in doing this for all different kinds of systems, have systems, for example, I don't know, HR administration, have they started to work with you to make your bots and automation easier? Opened up APIs, created APIs, just made
Yes.
things easier to automate. And it's not just for you, right? This is like the direction it's going in. Like, have you found that these systems are actually making it easier to actually automate?
Yes, that has been our experience. So, one of our HR partners, Central Reach, they did this, right? So we became their first ever partner and still only preferred partner in automation. And in collaboration with us, they developed an API. And I think that's great because it constitutes better building blocks where they can be used. So from all that we saw, those are examples of UI-based automation.
Yes.
Automation doesn't have to be UI-based, but it's a nice fallback, right? Because if there's no API, if there's no backend access, but there is like the front door human access, you at least know you could do that. Doesn't mean that you should. Usually, if there are other options, like an API, for example, you should use it where you can.
I mean, in a way, you don't want it to be UI based, right? In an ideal world, you want the UI to go away.
Yeah. So, I mean, people are talking about the agentic web, for example. So I might just talk a little bit about agentic AI as we get into it. But
Yeah.
it's this notion that maybe more and more, like we saw earlier, right, with a software as a tool versus software as an agent, there's going to be more software agents out there, software agents, AI agents. And so there's almost like a redesign of these platforms to cater to them. The
Right.
UI is for humans, right? Like we need to see
Humans.
things in a certain way. We need to be able to click somewhere.
Mhm.
But for an LLM or an agent or a software bot, you can provide other acts, other hooks to interacting with the platform that are more efficient. And so, people are calling that kind of like the agentic web, where you can, it's not just APIs, but something called MCPs, which is model context protocol, right? Which is facilitating AI models to take action on these systems.
Right. Okay.
Moving on. So this is just really some high level areas. This was just, I copied this from an old slide where just to give an example of there being more granular use cases, right, within a particular high level domain. So in this case, revenue cycle, where we can follow everything from the intake of a new patient to the full, the prior authorization, to the billing, to the posting of it, etc. And so this is one question that we oftentimes ask our clients to help identify opportunities, or for anybody watching this, being curious about maybe, okay, well, where can I use this? One way to think about it is, if you could delegate one thing overnight to bots, like what would you want it to be? And usually people pick something that's either a bottleneck, or maybe it's the bane of their existence, or maybe it's something they've been looking to delegate, but they just haven't been able to for a long time. And people may look at it with different lenses depending on their level in the organization. So if you're doing this yourself, you're likely looking at like, well, what part of my day is not my favorite part of my day usually? So like, what do I have to do that's really repetitive? Oh my God, I can't believe I have to log into this ER system and read these hand scribbled notes and then type it into the EHR system of the hospital, which is a different EHR. Oh my God, I can't believe I need to do that. Okay, that could be a good use case, for example, for a bot, right? What's high volume to the extent that you're drowning in the transactions? You can never rise above to get oversight and improve the process, or make a more systemic change, because you always have to deal with the day-to-day transactions. And lastly, what do you feel like is really error prone, right? Just really easy to mess up. Like if you have a 50-step process, sometimes it's by design, because maybe payers want you to make a mistake so they can at least delay the payment, or something like that. What is error prone
Interesting.
that you can, I mean, it's a little controversial. I think a
Yeah.
lot of providers hold that view. I don't want to take a position here, but that is certainly the opinion of many.
Yeah.
And so, but either way, it doesn't matter whether it's on the payer side or the provider side. If it's something that's error prone, that's also like, oh, maybe that should be considered. Managers or directors,
Yeah.
or let me stop for questions. Sorry.
What if you're working with a company and they can't decide? They can't come up with one function that they want to delegate because there are too many. Do you help them prioritize?
Oh yeah.
Do you help them?
Yes.
Like, is there low hanging fruit?
So we do. We have kind of a consultative approach to this.
Yeah.
And so we do help them prioritize. We talk to different departments. We ask them to motivate their ideas and really help qualify and justify why something is even worth automating. But quite often, though, we also see clients getting trapped in like analysis paralysis. They're like, oh, I could see 20 things that we should automate. I'm like, yeah, you're probably right. Well, I don't know. So like, which one do you want to do? It's like, I don't know. I'm kind of stuck. I'm frozen. And the problem there is, you don't necessarily need to get the top ROI use case first. Like if that takes you 2 months to make that decision, maybe you would have made that back by just starting with like the number 4 highest ROI. But it's still, it still makes sense to do, right? So oftentimes it makes sense, just get started with something that you have conviction will pay for itself. It's not like you only get one. Some of our clients have done 70 plus projects with us. Like, you can start with one, but then later you can do other positive ROI projects. So there is also the concept of speed. Like, you don't want to just sit on your laurels for too long, because if there is something that you should be automating that you're not, it is costing the organization. It is costing not just in terms of money, but also oftentimes in terms of retention as well.
Right.
So these are just different lenses of looking at the same thing, right? But I think depending again on your level in the organization, you're going to see it differently. So managers and directors, they oftentimes manage teams to do something. So it could be a revenue cycle team, it could be an authorizations team. Very often they'll have a couple of superstar employees and they're being held back. And managers are seeing elsewhere in the organization or a different function or opening a new clinic or something that they would love to have this person do. But then they lose their superstar on their team, and then the whole team would collapse and they couldn't manage daily transactions.
Mm.
Whenever you're in a situation like that, also great for automating, because then you're essentially allowing this talented employee to delegate the transactions to a bot so they can step up and do something else, usually more valuable, more meaningful, and more fun. And so that is another lens to look at it. Like, where is my current team being underutilized in terms of their potential? Another thing that managers see is open headcount, right? So it could be, oh man, we've had like an open headcount of 2 forever in our credentialing team. And that's either because it's really hard to hire for, or because you have problems with retention, or something like that. That's usually a symptom of something that maybe should be automated. So that's another lens to look at it. And then third is this notion of process compliance, which I think is interesting, but it's this idea that some managers are very proud of the processes that they have designed.
Oh, right.
And they get very frustrated when they're not followed, right? So it happens all the time, where someone designs like, hey guys, this is how we should do things, this is much better. And then in the beginning, everyone's like, yeah, let's do it this way. And they do, but then it drifts. It drifts over time, and it certainly drifts when you expand the team, right? And so there's this little frustration of like, man, I spent so much effort and put in so much thought into this elegant process. I just wish it were followed. Well, great. Just take that process and code it into the DNA of a bot,
right,
and have a bot follow it. Lastly here, kind of in many ways, the highest level in the organization, if you get the exec level or owners, there's this. So our mission statement is to maximize elevate human work, rather, is our mission statement, but it's similar to maximizing human potential. And it's this idea that it's this view of the world that there exists a lot of important and necessary grunt work that is holding most people back from what they could be doing. So, the swivel chair job, for example, or transcribing something, or being drowning in the transactions, right? That superstar employee that could have been opening the new clinic, stuck doing manually scheduling meal and rest breaks for labor law compliance, for example. If that could be delegated, then you can elevate your team. You can maximize human potential. If you're thinking like an owner, it's like, well, you get a higher return on human capital, right? And in many ways, that also translates to higher retention, because usually people want to do things that require more uniquely human judgment and capabilities, not like the high volume, error prone types of tasks, right? You get economies of scale, like what I mentioned earlier about being able to clone yourself arbitrarily, instantaneously, to deal with any kind of volume. Just that didn't exist, before you had software agents like this. And so from an owner's perspective, this creates new opportunities that they can also factor into M&A strategy. And this has happened for our clients too. If you've, say, designed elegant processes and you've automated them so they're actually being followed, and it's just a better way of operating, right? You can be competitive this way. Well, now you're much more attractive a acquisition target, because the buyer could incorporate that same process automation after consolidating the bigger volume, right? It also makes you a what can I say, more attractive. This English is wrong, but more attractive buyer, in the sense that it becomes more attractive for you to buy other companies, right? Because if you say, hey, they do kind of what we do, if we just consolidate them onto our system, we don't have to do anything. We just leverage our existing bots to just be like 12 clones instead of 5. And we're operating exactly the same way, very predictably, and getting these economies of scale. So that becomes an interesting play at the owner level.
Okay, I really like how you separated this out and explained, like, I guess, the perspectives from the different stakeholders. How much of this is your job, though? When you're talking to a new company about possible functions to delegate, ways of automating, how much do you care, or how much do you manage their potential frustrations or negative things that could happen after you create the automations? People losing jobs, potentially, right? Or people who are not interested in maximizing their human potential necessarily. They want to focus on grunt work, right? There are people who that's their job and they enjoy the work that they do. So how much of this do you have to actually manage?
It's a great question. I think it's very important. We do manage to some extent. We're also working on managing it more. It's like this. I basically consider it change management, right?
Yeah.
So what I've found over the years is that some clients are great at it, and some just really suck at it, right? So what we ask these days is like, what is the intent? And more often than not, actually, the intent is to be able to scale without adding extra overhead. Usually the intent is not to downsize,
Right.
but sometimes that's not communicated. And so if that's not communicated to your team, what can happen is that the team actually would really love for this to happen, and to move into another role where they can leverage their, whether it be their clinical judgment or their process expertise or their customer service abilities or something like that. But because they don't know, they fear for their job, and they may find different ways of sabotaging the project.
Right. There's a certain amount of education there. You have to educate them.
Yes. I think there is. Again, some I found are very sophisticated about this. Some really are not. And so I think, as a full service company like we are, it's part of our role to help them be successful in this regard.
Yeah. Yeah, I guess this is a big part of your job, considering all of these angles. Because for me, like, if I was on a call with a company and I was looking at all the possible things we could automate at that company, a big part of me would just be excited to just dive into some of those because they're interesting, not thinking about how it may affect jobs or the organization on a whole. It's just like, oh, wow, that's interesting. I would love to try to automate that. My team would love to do that. That would be something interesting to dig into. So I guess from your perspective, it's important to like be able to manage all of these different perspectives.
Absolutely. Again, like the most frequent outcome in our experience has been people lose their grunt work jobs, but then kind of are instantly hired elsewhere in the organization for a different role. Right. So in a way, it's like it's reallocation.
Yeah.
And it's interesting because I've been frustrated sometimes speaking to CFOs where their perspective is like, no, it has to be downside. Otherwise there's no ROI. What do you mean? It's like, well, I know that you reduced my FTE requirements for this by 5 people or whatever, but I'm not firing them, so we're not saving any money. And I'm like, so I want to talk about this because I feel like it's a bit of a fallacy. The way I see it is, okay, say those 5 people that were doing it, right? They no longer have to do this thing. You effectively fire them from that job. It's just that you needed 5 other people elsewhere in the organization, and you hired them there, probably way more cheaply and with way less risk than if you had gone externally. Because these people, they know your organization, they know your people, they know your mission, they know your culture, they're integrated, they can start right away. Like, to me, it's a double win, right? Not only did you save costs on a particular process in your company, you actually found the talent that you needed to expand elsewhere.
Mm-hmm.
And so to me, it's like, not only is it wrong to think that there was no ROI from that, there's actually double, in a way, double ROI from that, because you don't have to deal with the
Right.
recruiting costs and like the risk of making a bad hire and these things, right? Because these people are already integrated into your organization.
Mhm.
This is maybe interesting to think about. So starting this year, we've been delving deeper into agentic AI,
Mhm.
which is distinct from RPA, which is kind of our history. And while our agentic AI capability is still developing, like our RPA capabilities, I think are pretty mature, we're starting to see kind of the pros and cons of each. So if I'm to share kind of our view as it stands today, with the big caveat that things are changing fast, I would say the benefit of bots or RPA is that it's much more mature and proven tech. Once built, it runs way faster, cheaper, and more scalably. And usually it's much easier to audit the work because you have all these kinds of logs. It's deterministic. The logic is literally programmed, right? It doesn't get more specific than that. So if you ever wonder why a bot did something, you can always look in the code. It's like white box this way, right? It's like you can go down to the DNA level and figure out why something happened. For this reason, it's also easier to modify things, and you have full control over that. So say you had a bot running for a couple of years, and you're like, hey, I want to expand this to do something slightly different. Okay, well, because it's white box and because everything is programmed, you know which pieces to change, and you can predict if you make this change, what's going to happen with the bot. That's not always the case, right? With agentic AI, like most people can at least relate to just LLMs, right? Like just dealing, talking to ChatGPT, for example.
Mhm.
It's not deterministic.
Yeah.
Like if you wanted to achieve a similar conversation, but slightly different, it's harder for you to know how to change your prompt than it would be to, change the code around a program that you wanted to run differently. Okay. But agentic AI has its benefits too. Like it can handle way more dynamic data formats and inputs.
Yeah.
So it can reason on the fly. It can plan. It can make decisions. And so in one sense, it's more robust to changes, right? There's like a concept of like self-healing, but we've figured, I'll get to that in a second. But basically, like you can have it learn and adapt over time, and a lot of resources are being poured into this, right? So it's getting better fast. So who knows where it'll be, say a year from now. The cons, right? So RPA, I think because it is more explicit, not always, but sometimes it can be slower to stand up. If there are fundamental changes to the workflow, that will require some reprogramming, even though the reprogramming itself is easier to predict getting the desired outcome. It's limited to structured inputs. However, there are ways that you can tag on AI kind of at the periphery to turn unstructured input into structured input, but I'll get to that in a second. And so then this point, right, it doesn't adapt on its own the same way that AI agents can. Problems with agents, AI agents, is that it's still relatively early in its life cycle, and so therefore it's less predictable. I would not advise having agents in production without heavy guardrails, because if you talk to ChatGPT about whatever, you might have noticed cases where it just lied to you, or it made something up, right? Or it effectively hallucinated. And sometimes it does that in a way, it's kind of designed to, it does that in a way that looks on the surface very convincing and correct, but actually is wrong. And so it's the same thing, when it comes to AI generated code or when it comes to AI agents, where the misses are not always obvious, and that oftentimes makes them harder to detect and to fix. So for this reason, higher infrastructure and governance needs, like to run them, it's more expensive. It just takes more computing power. And the governance is kind of related to how do you deal with all the hallucinations, the auditability, things like that. And all this culminates in just it's harder to guarantee the deterministic outcomes the same way you have in rules-based automation. So if for some reason it couldn't process something one day, you're like, why couldn't it? Like yesterday it could, but today it couldn't, right? Things like that. Whereas in a more deterministic world, it's easier to figure out, there was a bug here, we missed this part of the business logic or something like that. It's easier to tell what's wrong with RPA. So the way that we treat it, at least today, is that RPA is really good when you deal with this necessary grunt work type of stuff, still like repetitive rules-based tasks, essentially. I feel like a lot of its weaknesses can be mitigated by combining it with AI. So for example, limited to structured inputs, that goes away if you tie it to an LLM chatbot at the periphery that, say, deals with natural language or inquiries coming in from humans. That then gets structured into like an intent that is structured, and now like a dumb bot can take over from there. Right? So you can also have hybrid solutions, is the point. Another way to have a hybrid solution is to have a hybrid solution with a human, right? So I mentioned some examples earlier where the bots do the heavy lifting with preparing all the data and teeing it up for a decision, and then a human makes the decision, right? So in this way, you can get around some of the limitations of like, hey, it can't adapt, like it can't reason on its own, but you can tee it up for a human to do just that part for you. The agentic AI stuff, I still think it's great for prototyping. You can at least get something scrappy up relatively quickly, even though you may not be confident enough to put it into production. And it could be a good tool in the toolkit when you deal with high variance use cases. So if you're expected to deal with lots of different formats, maybe things that you haven't seen before on the fly, then AI agents could be the better choice, because bots will break down too frequently and require reprogramming.
Right.
Does this breakdown make sense? Any questions?
This is a great slide. RPAs or RPA is completely programmatic. You can control it entirely.
Yes.
Agentic AI, more powerful in a way, but out of control. Very difficult. It's not deterministic, as you mentioned. Can't control the entire process. More human-like, actually.
Exactly. I was just going to say, it's like probably somewhere in between, right? It's like kind of between a bot and a human.
Yeah.
It's still acting to prompts, right? It will follow your instruction. A human can go completely rogue and actually be malicious, although I guess some people think that agents can also be.
Yeah.
That would be dangerous, right? If we get into that territory. But yeah, agents, they may inadvertently or unintentionally just hallucinate, right? Or go rogue a little bit. There are techniques to mitigate that.
Yeah.
When you have other agents, check the work of other agents, kind of like manager or QA agents, for example. Again, there are ways to build in guardrails and stuff like that. So again, I feel like they're just two different tools in the toolkit, and hybrid solutions can often work, right? So with agentic AI, you may use certain rules to serve as guardrails, for example. On the RPA side, you may use certain, like say an AI chatbot, just to deal with, the front-facing customer service component, but then everything else that happens in the backend can still be rules-based. So my current view is that you just got to use the right tool for the right job. Right. Today, again, I don't know where agents will be a year from now. Maybe it will have solved a lot of these problems.
Because would you say that they're getting easier to control, right? Through prompting, through guardrails. I mean, it's not at the level of doing it programmatically, where if the input is X, the output will be Y, right? This is dealing with all kinds of input. And like you said, one day it can process information and the next day it can't, for some reason. It's a black box.
Yes. So there are ways. The most common techniques have to do with multi-agent teams.
Yeah.
Again, they have different objectives. You have a similar kind of orchestrator or like master orchestrator managers, like, okay, hey, you go do the work, and you, hey, independently validate the work. And hey, you independently with a different AI model, go validate the same work. And hey, say you have 3 verifiers or something, right? Problem with this, at least today, is it requires a lot of compute. And it's slow, right? I don't know what compute will cost a year from now. Maybe it'll be a fraction of the cost, and this will be less of a problem, right? But today it can be pretty costly, certainly much more costly than running rules-based RPA this way. Okay.
Okay.
I think, let me see. Oh, yeah. And this is just another quote maybe to share. So this is from one of our clients where it goes back to the process compliance point, where sometimes people are very proud of the processes they make, but you don't always get them to be followed consistently. And this is what she said. She's like, bots are the only robust way I know how to implement a process exactly as defined. And so I thought that kind of phrases it nicely.
Yeah.
I hope that was edifying and that people learned something from this.
That was great.
I think it's very interesting, the revolution that's happening. I think there are some interesting questions around the change management, not just at an organizational level, right? But at a societal level, what needs to happen. My optimistic view, although I think it has to be balanced with some caution, is that it should allow people to not be held back. Like almost everyone that I've met doing this work, they have and they want to give more, especially in healthcare, because like you can give more either with your mind or with your heart, really, right? Because you can be compassionate in healthcare. And yet a lot of people are kind of stuck being used for like their hands, right? Typing stuff that that is necessary, but maybe shouldn't have been required for humans to do from the get-go. And so my hope, especially in healthcare, just seeing a huge supply problem, like there's way more demand than supply, is that, okay, if we can fix some of these supply things by allowing people to delegate the more repetitive stuff to stuff like bots and software agents and AI agents, then they can rise above the transactions. They can bring back the human connection to healthcare. They can think more systemically to make improvements. They can design better processes. They can just take on more volume. Like there are certain specialties we work with in like ABA where sometimes the waiting time can be like a year for a family to receive services. And I'm like, if I had an autistic child and, we did the diagnosis and everything, it's like, okay, we need to get ABA therapy. And it's like, oh yeah, sure. We will get you in like in 2027 or whatever. I'll be like, what?
Yeah, that's crazy.
It's crazy.
Yeah.
Right. And so even if you just do the same thing, but you can take on more people, then it's expanding access, right, to people out there who really need it.
Yeah. Wow, that was great. That RPA versus AI agent slide was great.
Awesome. Great. I'm happy to.
That made a lot of sense.
Yeah, good. I think a lot of people are trying to figure it out. I think there's a lot of buzz around AI, right, and AI agents. And I think some people believe, oh, RPA is completely obsolete, and maybe it will be. But in my humble opinion, not yet today. Like, there's still plenty of rules-based high volume processes out there that you don't need like the AI level of reasoning for.
Yeah.
Then maybe that's not, you just need to find the right tool for the right job.
Thanks for putting together that presentation. Fantastic. Thanks for taking the time.
Likewise.
I learned a lot. Yeah, I learned a lot. All right. Thanks a lot, Henry.
Thank you. Take care.
Okay. Bye. Thanks for watching. If you like this, be sure to subscribe. More interviews and demos coming soon.